My sister never had great taste in men, and during the autumn of 2012, she started dating a man named Marco. He was her age, 26, and worked as a chef. My sister and I are very much alike, but also each other's opposites. Identical twins, but with two very different personalities. She is trusting and fun, social and bubbly. I'm a total invert, in love with my books. We are very close, though, always have been, as I assume most twins are. It was when she first brought Marco to a family dinner at my parents' place that I noticed some less than charming cracks in his otherwise well-kept mask. It was subtle at first, but it was there. The signs of a controlling and jealous mind. An ever so brief hint of contempt that dances across his face every time she paid attention to someone else, or when it became evident that she was much more intelligent and well-read than he. He was very good-looking, though, I'll give him that, and I guess that's the veil that kept my sister from seeing the truth, a wolf in sheep's clothing. He was fit, tall, and had broad shoulders with green eyes, a charming smile, and a confident posture. Soon, she stopped calling me. She called me on a daily basis before. Then the family dinners thinned out to almost nothing. She started wearing clothes she wouldn't normally pick out herself. I tried talking to her, but at first she wouldn't listen, because when he wasn't a controlling asshole, he was the love of her life. Yeah, I told her psychos are weird like that. Anyway, one afternoon, she phoned me up. I was standing in line at a grocery store, but what she told me made me drop everything and rush out to the car. They had had a fight, a verbal fight, that had escalated until he left their home and slammed the door. Later, he had returned with a new car. He had sold the old two-door thing and bought a larger one, an old Volvo. He had stared at her and said, "This car has a trunk so large that I can easily fit a body in there, just so you know." At that point, she had gone into the bathroom, started to draw a bath, and climbed out the window. Where I live, this kind of threat isn't taken seriously by police. If you haven't been hit and got the marks to prove it, you got nothing. So we decided that she would leave town and take a job offer she had been interested in, but had turned down because he didn't want her driving over an hour to work each day. She would go stay with our friend Joe, who lived just under an hour from the new workplace, but 2 hours from her current city. Joe was an old childhood friend and had never been introduced to Marco, so it felt safe. I had phone contact with her every day to make sure things were okay. She seemed happy again, and I felt that the danger was over, until that day when I was out running. I had finished my run and returned to the parking lot. I usually hide the car key on top of one of the tires, and as I reached down to grab it, he put his arm around my throat, tight enough to cause breathing difficulties. "One twin is as good as the other," he whispered, and started dragging me away from the car. "Your sister caused this. It's her fault. She will never see you again. That's the punishment," he mumbled in my ear, as he moved me toward his car. Not the Volvo, but still a car of the right size. I was panicking, and despite my struggling and kicking, and despite squirming, he had no problem keeping his hold on me, and it was terrifying to realize how much stronger he was than I. I'm a fit woman. I run and fence. I have competed in CrossFit, and I did all I could to fend him off, but it didn't help. That's when I used my one free arm to stab the car key into his inner thigh. I aimed for something more painful, but his hold on me made it impossible to move enough. It stunned him enough to loosen his grip a bit, and I used the short window to crush the tiny bones in his foot with my terrain running shoes. He still managed to knock me down, but was then interrupted by a team of cross-country runners, and he fled the scene. My sister came home to witness against him, and she had a lot to say once she started talking. Together, we and the guys from the cross-country running team convinced the court to lock him up. Not for as long as I would have liked, but still. Back in 2011-2012, I returned home after a failed marriage, and I hadn't spent a lot of time with my family due to my grandmother's passing. I hid away for a while and avoided everyone. Eventually, my mom wanted to celebrate something. I can't remember what it was. Knowing my mom, it was probably just a Thursday. But she had a few drinks in her, and so did I. My mom loves bragging about me. She also loves setting me up. This is one of those times where her plans did not go over so well. The place where I was staying, there was a creek behind the house, and this place was far out in the middle of nowhere. Potential dates were slim, and I wasn't really in the mood to date anyway. That was honestly the last thing on my mind. My mother had other plans, and when she saw a man who was definitely her type, she called him over to walk across the creek, which apparently he did. She told him to stay there and ran back to the house to grab me to meet this super hot guy. I didn't feel like it, but I went anyway. I am 4'11". I was probably 24 at the time, and I'm not really into the bad boy type. This guy was tattooed 6'4", broad shoulders, and looked like he had lived in the gym. My instant reaction was something along the lines of, oh God, she's gonna make me talk to this guy. And she did. She made me talk to him the whole night and fed everyone beers. After a night of drinking, he casually mentioned his recent release from prison, that he was a bouncer at a strip club, and then openly admitted to spending the last 20 years in jail for committing murder. Awesome. He was also 38, a bit above my age limit. I felt myself sinking into my chair and trying to comprehend what was going on. My mom casually invited me inside with her to go get something, and then whispered, maybe this was a bad idea. Oh, really? Unfortunately, I was an unpaid live-in nanny at the time for a place to stay, and my boss was also a felon, because bank robberies. And so prison gave them both something to talk about, and this guy was not ever going to leave. I think I claimed I was going to bed early that night, and removed myself from the situation. But this guy just kept coming back every few nights. My mom had gone back home at this point, and it was starting to freak me out. He insisted that we have some shots of tequila and hang out, and I agreed. I didn't want to, but the man I was living with said that he would get rid of him if there was a problem. He started getting pretty close to me, and I was starting to get really uncomfortable. Eventually, things got weird. He kept trying to rub my back and then repeatedly kept asking to massage my feet. And I had to tell him myself that I needed him to leave, which he seemed a little upset about. Still, he got up and left, but then sent me a friend request on Facebook. I gladly accepted because I could set up my post to only show him that I wasn't home, even if I was. I could also hide my real post from him. He seemed to have a romantic interest already, who was wondering who I was. She seemed very upset and posted multiple comments on his Facebook page, making me even more uncomfortable. I was completely uninterested. He still kept coming around to the screen door, where I spent weeks hiding off to the side of the room, pretending no one was around. I would sometimes see him through the back sliding glass door, watching the house from across the creek. I still don't like the man I was living with for other reasons, but thankfully he noticed something was wrong, and I think he eventually talked to the guy. Everything suddenly stopped, but it took me a long time to feel safe at home again. I had knives everywhere, and I was scared to just walk to the mailbox or to pick the kid up from the bus stop. That was also the last time I let my mom set me up with someone. I'm an 18-year-old small-town girl from Finland, and I think the following story is probably the creepiest thing to ever have happened in my life so far. My friend Rosa and I are very outgoing, and we arrange different kind of parties and activities for our circle of friends. We also love throwing little get-togethers with about 10 people closest to us, as we did this time. My parents went away for the weekend, so I thought it would be perfect for us to throw a little barbecue. So we asked our friends to come to my house at 6. I was excited because Rosa told me that Melanie was bringing her new boyfriend with her. I wanted to meet him. We all did. By 6:30, almost everyone had arrived. We had asked everyone to go straight to our backyard because Rosa and I had turned the kitchen upside down, making these kinky surprise appetizers and margaritas for everyone, and we didn't want the surprise to be ruined. So we were in the backyard. Everyone is opening beer bottles and having a laugh, and I see that Melanie has joined us. I hug her and tell her that I'll be back in a sec. As I start placing plates around the table, I feel Rosa poking me. "Did you meet Melanie's new boyfriend already? He's so odd." I shook my head and answered, "Not yet, where is he?" "He's inside using the bathroom." At this point, I remember leaving the ice bag on the kitchen table, and I hurry inside so I can get them back in the freezer. I stop at the door when I see a guy in our living room, staring at this antique ornament my mom got from her friend. Rosa was right. He was odd, to say the least. He was taller than me, but not tall for a guy. He had short blonde hair, a white tank top, and cargo shorts. Definitely not what Melanie would usually go for. But hey, who am I to judge? Besides, I've had my fair share of weird boyfriends in the past. So I smile, step forward as I place the ice back in the freezer, and say, "Hey, you must be the new boyfriend. I'm Margot." He turns around, looks at me, and doesn't say a word. What a creep. "So I want to hear everything about you and how you and Melanie met, but first I'll have to get these napkins to Rosa. Just come sit with us in the back. The appetizers will be served soon." He is still staring at me. What is wrong with him? Then he suddenly smiles and says, "Okay," with a rough voice. He stayed still, so I mentally just shrugged and went outside. I pull Rosa from the table, give her the napkins, and tell her that her description of Melanie's new boyfriend was a bit of an understatement. That's when Melanie walked toward us. "Hey, I just met Aaron. What's up with him?" I asked, trying not to sound too offending. She looked confused as hell. "What do you mean? I just told the guys that he couldn't make it because of family stuff." Now I was the one confused. If that wasn't Melanie's boyfriend, who the hell was he? Rosa was probably thinking the same thing because she gave me a panicked look before we both ran inside with everyone following us. The guy was gone, and so was my sleep for the next few months. We called the police right after, and they came to our house, but that wasn't much help because he was already gone. I didn't tell the cops what he looked like, but they never found him. And we met the real Aaron a week later. He seemed like a good guy. Since moving to Birmingham, UK, in September last year to study music technology, I was under the impression that any city has its good and bad areas. Where I lived, in an area called Perry Bar, just north of the center, was renowned for its violent types. After a few weeks of living there, I decided it was just horror stories from other students of crazy types lurking in the subway, or high-rise buildings which had a distinct weed-like scent always. It wasn't until November that I realized that maybe these stories are certainly true, and that Perry Bar was certainly not a safe place for students. It was approaching 1 p.m., and I had to get a bus from the center of the city to Perry Bar. Usually I'd take the 907, 937, or something of that nature. A modern bus which missed all of the dodgy areas coming into Perry Bar. Instead, I took the 51 service because the bus itself takes a little longer to get to where I needed to be. But it was probably worth it to sit down before the 907 arrived 14 minutes later. Or so I thought. The bus seems relatively quiet for a midweek, midday service. Only a handful of people on the bottom deck, and around 4 or 5 on the top. I decided I would sit upstairs, directly opposite the stairs leading up. The bus was just leaving the center of Birmingham. On the last stop of the center, I hear a few more people entering the service, including one guy who was yelling, "I've been fucked over and now it's your turn. Fuck you." This was still very loud even from upstairs, but I figured he's either on the phone or he's just a typical crazy person from the heart of Birmingham. Either way, I thought that the driver would deny him access if he was an obvious issue, so I ignored it. None of the new passengers came upstairs, just me and the others who were spread around the back of the upstairs. This guy came up through. The loud, angry-sounding guy came up, and yes, he was still yelling, and no, there was no phone to his face. He was probably around 35 years old. He had black-gray, spiky hair, about 4 teeth, if they even qualified as teeth, and he was wearing bright, bold-colored Nike high-top shoes. This time he was yelling something slightly more strange, and it was clearly directed at all of the passengers on this service. "You're all dead, and you know you are. The Mafia are coming. I have called them, and the Mafia are going to kill you all." Now, naturally, I assumed this to be a load of crap, and I was right. To this day, I have seen no sign of the Mafia whatsoever, but that doesn't mean this guy himself wasn't a threat. He takes his seat and at the very back of the bus, across an empty row of seats. At this point, I realized CCTV footage feed at the top of the stairs. This feed was flickering between individual cameras on the bus at one time. Every time I saw this guy, who populated the whole of the screen when it was his shot, I made sure to keep an eye on him. The feed moves on from him, and I knew it would take a minute or so to go back to his seat, so I continued looking down, keeping to myself, when I heard a neat noise of feet thudding behind me. I figured there was a good chance it was this man, and so I thought about looking behind to see who it was for a long time, until eventually I thought it was safe to take a peek. I did just that, for a split second. I looked behind me and straight back forward. "What the fuck are you looking at?" I heard the man speak in his strong Birmingham accent. "I can sit wherever I want. Look at me again and I'll fucking stab you." At this point, he tapped me on the shoulder, and I looked back around, and he showed me a knife. This knife was about 4 inches long, and the handle had a very intricate chrome details on it, like skulls and snakes. "Look at the floor, fucking idiot," he added. A moment passed, and I hear him mumbling indistinguishable swear words, and he shoves the back of my head. The moments leading to this, I was very tense, rightfully so, and so his shove made very little impact, and I barely moved an inch. I knew it was certainly not worth fighting back, even if I wasn't too scared to do so, and I knew it was time to leave. I see the bus approach at the bus stop, and so I pick up my bag as if I'm leaving. I wish I had left then, but I didn't know if he was going to follow me off the bus, and I would definitely be less safe outside in the heart of Perry Bar, with a knife-wielding maniac on my back. So I stayed on the bus, but sat opposite the stairs on the bottom deck of the bus. That way I could keep an eye on the man should he decide to also come down. A few minutes pass, and I have my eyes glued to the top of the stairs to see if he's going to come down. I assess the bus for a different seat should he come down, and I see an empty seat next to a very built gentleman in high visibility clothing. I know that if I see the crazy guy, I will move next to that guy, even if it looks very strange moving seats twice just to end up next to someone when there are dozens of empty seats. I hear a thud from upstairs, and so I lock my eyes onto the top of the stairs again, and I see one bright, bold-colored Nike high-top shoe meet contact with the first step. I get up and take a seat next to the tough-looking guy. The crazy man is now standing next to the driver and has his back to me. I see him stagger and slide around the bus as it moves, and I remain tense. As we approach the bus stop, he turns around and sees me, his face filled with anger. He starts taking steps toward me, yelling, "I thought you were leaving. You're a fucking liar. I'm going to fucking kill you." And the eyes of every passenger turn to me, including the guy next to me. Although no single passenger ever told me they knew I was scared, I think they all knew. Especially the dude next to me, who stands up and yells, "Take one step closer and I'll knock your head off." And this guy stood about 6.5 feet tall, and probably just as wide. The guy mumbles something, and he gets off at the next stop. The driver checks that I'm okay, and the guy has since been reported, but I haven't heard anything back about it. For some context, I'm a 37-year-old male, and this takes place 5 years ago. I was working the front desk at a small office. This office was on the ground floor of an office building, and it's not unusual for people to wander in lost or looking for a restroom. It was about mid-morning on the day this took place, and I was the only one in the office at the time. A man walks in and comes up to my desk. He looks to be in his mid-20s and a high on who knows what. I ask if I can help him with something, to which he replies that he just left the bar and is in need of a ride home. He sounds really strung out. I ask him if he'd like me to call him a cab, and then he says, "Well, could you give me a ride home?" Trying to be nice, I explained that I could not leave the office and again offered to call him a cab. This time he says yes, and I instruct him to take a seat across from my desk in the lobby. As I finish on the phone with the cab company, the man gets up and approaches my desk. He then proceeds to tell me, "I think you're very attractive." At this point I'm creeped out, though not from being hit on by a man, since, I am gay. This just didn't feel right, and the way it came out was odd. Like, it sounded without energy and as distant as everything else he said. Normally, if you're going to give someone a compliment of this manner, there's usually some feeling behind it, or at least a smile, but he had the same monotone inflection and an expressionless face. All I was able to muster was a quick "thank you," and just after that my coworker walked in the front door. This guy immediately turns to her and asks, "Can you give me a ride home?" She looks at him in horror and just tells him sorry, and that she's extremely busy, as she shuffles quickly past him into the back office. I remind him that he has a cab on the way. He sits back down and doesn't say anything. About 5 minutes pass, and he leaves the office without a word. I figure he just decided to wait out front for the cab, so I go back about my day, but not before wondering what the hell that was all about. A little while later, I get a call from the cab company saying that the car arrived and there was no one out front waiting. I briefly explained the situation and apologized. At this point, curiosity got the better of me. I got my coworker to cover my station, and I leave the office to see if this guy is still wandering around the building. No sign of him out front. I turn the corner of the building and look to the small shopping center right across the street. Pinned down in the middle of the driveway by 3 cops is the creeper, looking for a ride. I had no idea what happened, and I regret not asking the officers afterward. I checked the local crime blotters and the local news outlets, but never found any mention of the incident.